So I've only got 200 or 300 slides. Hope you've all eaten. Kidding. Carson and I are really thrilled to be here. I'm Chula. I am a senior associate with Group 4 Architecture Research and Planning.
Carson Block.
Who is not with Group 4, but we work with him so much that he does feel like a part of the Group 4. Honorary. Exactly. So I guess that's introductions. The Group 4 is a Bay Area-based architecture and planning firm that has a national practice with a specialty in library master planning for particularly large urban libraries like San Diego Public Library. So this is something we really, really enjoy doing and are thrilled to do here. I've worked with Carson on a number of these projects, and including, for those of you who haven't been to Dayton, Ohio lately. I think of master planning for libraries a little bit like planning a trip. Like you know where you start, and you know where you want to go. You figure out where you want to go, and then you kind of figure out how you want to get there. So what we were doing, what Carson and I have been doing with the library and the Foundation of the Friends over the last 4 to 6 months is talking about where we are now, the starting point. We'll get to the destination later, but for now, today we're going to talk about what we see here now, the planning context, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that leads into the master planning process and what will come next. So we've been looking at your data, we've been talking to people. We really see a lot of good things. So a lot of this is I'm not telling you anything new. Some of this is us telling you what we've seen and giving you the opportunity to tell us, particularly commissioners, what we're getting right, what we're not quite seeing. We will have a point in here or two for formal questions, but please feel free to interrupt us at any time. If something's unclear, you might hear a little bit more about something. In looking at San Diego and the city, and it's one of the biggest cities in the country. It's very vibrant, diverse. I was looking back actually at the original grant proposal that was put forth to Andrew Carnegie back in 1899 to get a Carnegie Library. And at that point, one of the things that they put in was that this is a community where 20% of our residents are immigrants. So it's had this like really long history of this is a place where people come from all over the world to be part of the community. There's a big diversity of income and education. Not everyone is wealthy. There's lots of issues there that we heard about in the previous discussion. And then this idea of the city of villages is really intriguing to us, and that manifests in these different ways. Some of it is physical and geographical. Some of it is just the idea that there's these neighborhoods that have really strong identity, and that shapes how people see and use the library. We know that the library is a department of the city. It's got, I should be looking at this, not up there. Yes. Speaking this way. It's a big, you've got one of the biggest networks of branches in the US in terms of the size of your library. But it's not just about the branches, it's about the sort of omni-channel approach to service delivery. There's a website with rich resources and information, and then the library increasingly, as you know, is going through outreach and in partnership with other agencies, nonprofits, and even private organizations delivering more and more service out in the community. So when we think about facilities, it's only one piece of what the library is doing and how it's delivering service. We also know that the budget has been increasing, but there's always a question every year of how much the library is going to get to support operations. We heard about the 7 million visits a year. It's an impressive, your stats are impressive, the number of people who walk in every day, every year, how much circulation you're doing in your collection. Nearly every kid in San Diego on average attended a children's program in fiscal year 2018, which is pretty good. And I think you're the highest rated city service on the annual survey, so good. The California State Library maintains some 10-year trends, and I won't go deep into this, but what impressed me about the statistics that they did maintain was even though the collection growth has slowed for reasons, circulation is still high. So the library is doing more with less and still providing great service. That's just one of those areas that we see. library has great partners. The foundation does a tremendous job of supporting what the library does, and the Friends as well. We're very delighted by what we see in terms of the engagement of each of those partners and the results, frankly, the amount of support you're able to deliver to the library.
And that's one of your unique strengths, is sometimes those relationships are not always as strong or as cohesive as they are in San Diego, and so that is such an asset to build upon. And it's fun. And just a little story, I raided the Friends stores like I usually do at the library, and I got someone's a CD and they put their concert ticket inside the CD, so it was like someone's prize CD and concert ticket, and it was 50 cents or something, so it was great.
We have been looking back at the master plan that's been guiding capital development over the last 17, 18 years. It was a big, bold plan, and there's frankly some really nice things about that plan. It feels to us like it was taking what was a responsible approach to expanding facilities. It sort of was implemented, and then implementation slowed over time, mostly due to funding. So, one of the wonky charts that I like to do is sort of to kind of explain what I call capacity for service. It has to do with facilities. So, City of San Diego's population has been growing over time. Right now, I think you're 1.4, 1.5 million. That's projected by Sandec to keep growing. Over the last 30 years or so, you've been doing quite a lot of building. You've been adding over 100,000 square feet in branch space each decade until this decade, and then it really, really slowed. And as a result, if you plot those things against each other, the ratio of library branch space to the population, that line has been declining. I did some quick math earlier, and if you had been implementing all the projects in the plan, I think you would still be on an ascending plane, but because that slowed, you're declining against population. Now, is this bad? What is the number you are at today, and is that the right number or the wrong number for the future? We don't know that. That's a real question that we'll dig into as part of the full master plan. Where should you be? But this is just what we're seeing now. And if growth continues, and if nothing happened from here on out, oops, that line.
And things change quickly, don't they?
The button. We also took a look in a couple different ways at how branches are distributed in the city, and there's some inequity there. There are some council districts in particular that have more branches, more space, newer branches, and others that are a little or way lower. I don't know if you can see, but District 3 is at 0.1 square feet per capita, and Districts 5 and 7 are up over 0.5. Again, I don't know which of those is the right number, but you can see that this level of service is different throughout the city. We've seen some of the statistics about the capital maintenance needs at some of your branches. The master plan that was done in 2002 didn't set out to address all of the maintenance needs of all the branches. It was really focused on expanding that capacity for service. So there's a lot of maintenance that still needs to happen. The city did a facility condition assessment sometime within the last 3 to 5 years. I'm not sure. I'm going to go through this quickly, where they assess the amount of deferred and upcoming life cycle maintenance of a building. You take that amount of money and you divide that into the assumed replacement cost of a building, and that gives you a percentage called a facility condition index, which is basically the percent of the building you're going to need to replace over the next 5 to 10 years. The city, I believe, has established a threshold of 15% as where it would like to get all city facilities. The library right now, your branches on average, I think, are at 25%, and some of them are as high as 60%. So these are some of the issues that we want to look at as well. When you have that much maintenance on a building, that's in a particular good time to take a step back, look at that building and say, is this the building we want to spend that much money on? Or is this an opportunity to rethink other things? Is it still providing the service we want? Is it still supporting the level of service that this community wants? So. And then I haven't visited all of your branches. I haven't visited most of your branches, but I did get to go see the park when I was there, and I met with friends, and it was a good meeting. And I was struck by how classic the service model here is. It's very full of books, and that is, you know, very, very typical. And if I look at the statistics on what your collection size is and how much branch space you have, I don't need to look at the rest of your branches to know that this is the same condition in a lot of the other ones too. So one of the things we heard when we were last time is the community really wants more program space. It's about a place to go and be with other people and learn and engage and connect. And you know, so what happens to the books? There's strategy, and that's one of those things we'll look at in the master plan too.
And just collections in general, because there's a lot of moving pieces. Books are one of the things that we connect people with, but there's so many other services as well, both person-to-person services, different digital options for services and service deliveries. So it's really looking at how the mix of that fits our patrons and where they need it as well, very individualized.
This building, I was trying to think earlier of another building, another library that has changed the skyline of the city that it's in, the way that this one does. I flew in last night, and there it is. It's really dramatic. It's a beautiful building. What is the role of this building in the library system in the future? Is this the right place for central services to be? You still want to do all of your collection development technical services out of a building like this, which is downtown and traffic, or you know, we have a lot of clients who are looking at strategies to move that out, recapture space in their main central libraries for people. So that's part of the calculus as well in the master plan.
The state of technology, my primary role as a library consultant is in areas of technology. There's been some amazing changes that have happened. I should have put Clients Free, even though it's not a technology development, it is a leading development, and it's something that, frankly, some libraries are afraid to do still because of not thinking about how things have changed today and what is the purpose of a fine and a fee, for instance. Is that a barrier to access, or is it something that promotes it? These are all very good questions, and we were also psyched to see that news come out. It was really good. Some other things that have happened really well is that the libraries have embraced the idea of MAKE through the Idea Labs system-wide. So it's been a wonderful accomplishment. There's been a migration to a new integrated library system. That's the core digital system that all libraries use to manage our collections, to serve our patrons, and to provide physical and digital services. An RFID, radio frequency identification conversion project, which is massive, right? And a library of this size, and such a good thing for library services. I think kids love RFID the most because it's like magic, right? They can bring up a stack, and it's like, whoa, I'm done. I can take these books out and read them and do things. Also, updates to self-service and thinking about those in our community that would like to have more options for serving themselves instead of having to have mediated service. And the best way to judge that is to let patrons decide what they would like. What level of self-service do they want? Often we see it being mandated, saying you will have this level of self-service. I think patrons are pretty good at telling us what level they want, especially at what areas, and we can trust them on that. Also, the formation of a technology advisory board. It's really good to have different voices and different partners in keeping track of technology. And the EDGE technology assessment and action of that. Now, the EDGE is a collection of benchmarks to help libraries compare their efforts around technology, but it's beyond that. It's really how technology is connected to library services. And it's a tool to give suggestions for tweaks or changes into the whole ecosystem that technology supports. Technology, of course, not being its own thing, but something that integrates to deliver the patron services to make things better. Let's see. And there's
figured out my technology.
Yeah, I know, it's like, which one, I have my glasses, I'm like, which one is this? The state of technology, there are some challenges, of course, there always are with technology and something that has this much churn all the time. One is the equity of technology access throughout the library system. That's a huge challenge, and it's not as easy as throwing money at it or throwing technology at it. It's really looking at what are the needs in the community served by that library, what is the library's capacity to do that, and I think even more importantly, what is the staff capacity to meet expectations, to anticipate expectations in terms of that technology? It's a huge piece of really solving that. Also, the tech updates for older buildings needs to be done, because just as Joe was describing in the built environment, the majority of the libraries built at a time that technology was not thought of as something important. And when I say technology, I'm also talking about power, right? Just places to plug things into, as basic as that is, as well as different digital technologies, places to do things, because technology, we actually need elbow room when we're working, right? And things like that. So that's also a challenge. Staying current, especially for library staff, but also as an extension, the community. These kind of go hand in hand, because libraries are a place of trust for community members. When there's a technology question in their life, or if they're using technology to do something that they need to do, especially get a job, interact with government services, other things, they look to librarians as their guides, their trusted guides, to help them understand what to do and to make choices that they're confronted with. And so that's staying current is an ongoing challenge. And also just the sheer scale and the costs of technology. Technology as a thing that libraries did kind of came in like a thief in the night, and now it's integrated into everything that we do at some level. It's either supporting a service or it's a direct service. We're not always good at adjusting for that and anticipating that, yes, this is also a cost, and making that strategic. So those are some of the things that we've seen. And of course, context, we all know that things are changing dramatically. One day we have we should have used this on here. One day we have a service called Netflix, which mails us DVDs. Now Netflix is out of that business, right? It's all about streaming, and that happened very quickly and very transparently, right? I remember there was a time when I was giving a presentation, and I'd ask people how many people had a smartphone, and not very many people would raise their hand. After a couple of years, everyone would raise their hand, and then my next question was, "What do you remember not having a smartphone?" And people say no. It's like, you only had it for a couple of years. Isn't that funny? Right? That's something to think about. So those transitions a lot of times happen from market forces that are out there. And that's something that we need to anticipate as we're going forward. We also have what I think is a very interesting situation between physical and digital materials. The difference being, of course, a library can purchase a physical material and we can loan it to our community members. Libraries own this. We can loan it to others in any way we want. Digital materials are not purchased. They are leased. They're leased or licensed for a period of time. And there's all sorts of restrictions and different models in terms of that. And so our latest is the news about the committee. I won't go into that at all, but this is probably the first time that libraries are organized to say that the rules that the publisher is putting on digital materials is not really compatible with how we like to purchase materials and share them with our communities. So this is keeping track of these trends is really good. There was a mistake maybe 10 years ago. There would be like, especially city manager would say, "Hey, there's all these ebooks coming out. We don't need a big library, do we?" It's like, well, not so fast, not so fast. We know, for instance, that younger people love physical materials as much as older people. So we like physical materials, right? And we like digital materials. And so that's part of that equation.
And those are all things, the reason we started with since 2001 is that was when the last master plan was. Like, these are all things that have happened since that time. It's been such a dramatic time to change.
Yes, exactly. And it's not going to slow down, right? It's going to, in fact, even increasingly change. So that's not good enough to plan on, right? To say, oh my gosh, everything's changing. We shouldn't do anything, right? Well, I'm going to share some trends that, even though there's a lot of places that track trends, these are trends that I found to be enduring and useful as we're looking at planning for services and buildings. One is that libraries are transitioning from places that were considered static, quiet places into very active places. This is an interesting challenge because guess what? We still need quiet spaces, right? We need active spaces and we need quiet spaces in the right balance and in reflection of what the community needs in any specific location. We're also moving from measuring our value from transactional to transformational, right? So it's still important to have data that counts how many people are using our collections, how many people are using our services, how many people are attending story times and things like that. That's a piece of it. But we want that data and other data to help tell a story of how we're helping our community transform in the way that our community desires, in a way that's specific and special to the library. We have, in the age of information, we've got a wheelhouse that nobody else has, and that's a place of trust, as well as a place of access for our community. So we're uniquely positioned to say, what is the transformation that we would like to contribute to, and what are we best equipped to do? The other is moving from consumption to creation. So the library used to be a place, the warehouse of books is what it was called. Well, there's information literally everywhere. It's in the air now, right? We snap it out with our smartphone. The library is still the place, though, where vetted our information that balances perspectives, that shows all sides and all perspectives of the issue are presented. It's also a place where people increasingly are coming together, as demonstrated in your makerspace, to build things together, to create things together, to contribute back. And sometimes that's digital, but it's not just flashy stuff in terms of the makerspace. My favorite example of a makerspace is a photo that I'll show you. I'll show you this in our visioning presentation at some other point. It's vision, or it's a makerspace of Lakota Sioux quilting circle, and all they need for the makerspace is a table, right? Because they're coming together in community to talk and to create beautiful things. The library is increasingly becoming that place in communities across the country. This is extremely exciting, this shift from formal education into self-directed education. Libraries have always played a role in this through like proctoring exams, for instance, and having places or having resources. Often libraries have been called the university for everyone. Everyone who can go to the public library to learn. And there's a lot of potential here that's still untapped. Also, we are on the business side of our equations, we're moving from just a few formats to many formats and growing. So before it was easy. We used to just loan things that we could buy. Whoa, that's great. Now we need to connect patrons to materials that can't be bought, right? And so wrangling with that is as much a technology problem as it is a social challenge, and really understanding what needs are. We're also moving from one size fits all to personalization, or at least the expectation of personalization. Increasingly, we're expecting our digital environment to understand what we want and to anticipate what we want and need. That comes from data collection. Libraries, by culture and by statute, respect confidentiality and privacy. So this is one of our biggest challenges to face and talk about, to say what is the best way to provide these services when expectations are growing. Another one that's super exciting is this idea of going towards digital inclusion. Thinking of not, at least we think of digital haves and have-nots. This is more about digital, including people at different levels. So sometimes people have access to a smartphone, for instance, but they're not sure what's going on with it. They don't know how to use it. They don't know privacy issues. They don't know how to use it to grow and to learn. So those things are all very important. Looking ahead, too, we have different organizations tracking trends, and I've included some slides here from our digital inclusion advocates from IFLA, which is the International Federation of Library Associations, and the Center for the Future of Libraries at ALA. And one of the reasons that these are all up here is that everyone has a different notion of what the trends are. So these trends are extremely informative to inspire us, but the best and closest look we have to take is what we're seeing in our own community and how it applies. And you've already have such a rich history of that as a starting point. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you. So, moving into just a couple of slides about library facility trends that we're seeing as we work around the country and designing branches. I mean, I know you have new branches in progress and you're seeing some of these things here too. But I found a document from 2008 about what the vision for this building was, and there's so many nice things about it, about what this library was going to be. And wouldn't it be great if all of your branches supported all of these things too, education and art and those civic and cultural connections, all of those wonderful things. So one of the things we're seeing in libraries around the country is a rebalancing of space for people and collections. One of the things that is perhaps counterintuitive, but that we see over and over again, is that as you start to reduce your collection footprint in your branches, stuff starts to circulate more. Like it becomes more accessible to people, they can discover materials more easily, and it starts to go off the shelf. I know, right? It feels counterintuitive, but it's one of those things that we see. And as we shift toward more people-oriented service, more community engagement, and connecting our community members with each other, the collection becomes a complement to that rather than the main dish that it has been or become. Space for children in libraries is really changing. Traditionally, kids are small, and so they're a small part of the community, so we'll give them a small little area. But we know that kids never travel alone. There's always two bodies, at least. Sometimes there's a ginormous stroller that comes with it. And kids like to move and run around. There's so many things that libraries like to do to promote early literacy and learning and discovery in kids, that we're seeing children's areas in the libraries that are as big as the adult and teen areas, or bigger. We're going to dedicate more of this branch to children than we do to adults. So that's one of those areas that we're seeing shift. And then providing space for more choices in places to go, and it's about gathering and promoting. Like, it's okay, Carson was talking about the need for quiet space in the library, and that's true. But one of the things we're also seeing with some of our clients is the default state in the library is not going to be shush. It's going to be, this is a place where it's okay to come and encouraged to come and welcome to speak with each other and to engage and collaborate. We'll provide areas where if you need to concentrate, you can go sit and you're welcome to do that, or we'll check you out a pair of noise canceling headphones. But this library is an active community space. We all want to do a different thing when we walk in the library, and that may be a different thing on one day than it is the next day. So one day I may want a space to sit more quietly, other days I may want a place to come and talk with friends. It's providing that variety and choices for people. I haven't found quite the right way to talk about it yet, but the sort of high impact programs that the library is adding. And sometimes these are the kind that you think of in a central library kind of an environment. It's provided with specialty environments and specialty staff to really activate it and make it welcome. But where in a network as big as the San Diego Public Library do you put these high impact spaces? Are you trying to do them in tiny bits at every branch, or are you going to strategically locate them so you can have that concentration and the right resources for the job? This, in addition to meeting rooms, having more high flexibility, high capacity space for programs as well. Performances. This is the Dayton Main Library, where this space, actually one of the nice things about it is you see in the upper right corner, the whole wall of it moves away. So when it's not being used for a piano recital or a civic program, it just becomes seating for the rest of the library. It's very easy for staff to see what's happening in there, and it just becomes a more flexible space. And then having staff who are able to do more things with people. Sort of the big desk model where it's word reference and they're back there and some staff have a hard time getting out, that's going away. Streamlining operations, using technology to make staff more efficient so that they can focus on those value add services. That's really what make the library so special. The lower right picture there, that is the Bowtie Ranch branch in Chula Vista. Has anybody seen that one? That's a great example of being able to do a lot in a small space. It's a 3,500 square foot branch in the Bowtie Ranch Mall, it replaced a 10,000 square foot branch, and it does 3 or 4 times the business of that one. So it's not just about the amount of space you have, it's what you're trying to do with it, it's where it is, and it's how it's used and activated. So this was the first formal spot to pause and say, this is our race through your context and what we've seen. Is it sounding right? I've seen some nods, I've seen some crinkled brows, I've seen, what else do we need to know, or what else should we know as we think about San Diego and your library?
Great summary getting us started. And so I guess we will open this up to, I see some familiar faces and some new faces. So questions, comments, things that you feel you like or might be missing, or? I know it's not shy room. I know it's
We cannot possibly have got it 100% right.
Bingo, you're done. Okay.
So from your, what percentage are you seeing libraries decrease their collections? Because we're looking at that now. So I mean, the last 2 libraries that we've opened, we went in, and as soon as we had everything in, we were like, there are way too many shelves in here, and then we had to immediately, even though we had gone with that with the plan, when we opened there, we had to pull them out because it just was too overwhelming. So I don't want to make that mistake going forward. And so I'm just wondering if you're seeing a trend in the percentage of decrease of collection, or does it just depend?
There's a lot of factors in it. The size of your collection is not the same as the size of the collection that's on the shelf at any one time. We have clients who, are developing their collection way faster than their community can check the books out, and so you get in a situation where the library just feels really, really full. And so it's talking about the capacity, your on-shelf capacity. How do you manage your collection development so that you are maximizing the things that people want to check out? Monique, and I cannot pronounce her last name, but yeah. When I was walking through one of her libraries with her, she said, my ideal branch has 0 books on the shelf because they're all so great that they're checked out. And that was really like a mind shift for me. One of the things that we had done on our last couple of master plans is, in addition to developing a recommendation for amount of space, amount of capacity, both branch and central, is to pair that with a recommendation for what we're calling awkwardly collection density. Like, you're going to have a branch of this size, and here is the maximum amount of books we recommend you put in it so that you can do all of the people stuff that you want to do. Because so many, if you don't provide some guidelines around what you want to do in that space, it's very common to end up with that situation.
You just fill it with
because we're also used to, 30, 40, 50 years of, we've walked into branches and they've all felt like full of books, and that's a comfortable feeling for a lot of people too. So part of it is educating people about, it's going to feel different. Even if we take the same collection size and we add more space around it for people, it's going to feel like the books went away, and they didn't. It's just that the perception of how full the space is with books. So,
and targeting the amount of collection that you want out on the street, the flow rate of the collection itself, is a really handy thing to do as well to help make that decision. So how much usage do you want to see from the collection, right? How many empty shelves do we want to make, right, to create more spaces for other services? I saw a bunch of hands.
Yes.
First of all, I want to commend you for, I'm relatively new to the San Diego community, so I don't pretend to understand it very well. To the extent I do, I think you really reflected a lot about how the community is and what the library system is about currently. The one thing that I'm curious about is the comparison of the demographics of the entire community with the demographics of the basic library use population. The only sense I have is that it's very high when you're talking about children 0 to 5, that it may be moderate as kids are in elementary school. It drops off, at least in the community where I'm, drastically with teens. It's pretty high with seniors to the extent that there's senior mobility. I'm not quite sure with adult populations. And then demographically, in terms of income level, is it less in communities where it's more affluent? Is it more because people need the libraries? Those sorts of things I'd be more curious about.
Those are great questions. I don't know. We track those sorts of things? Like,
We do, and it really does depend on the community. And so we see that you have certain, you do have, like North Park has a lot of young families. And so you are seeing that 0 to 5 really heavily used. But then we see, I think, across the system, a drop in that 18 to 30. And that's just a really difficult group to capture, period, anywhere, because there's so much competition for time.
Well, one of the things we don't have is a space for makerspace.
Right.
And as a result, teen use is likely to
lower.
be a lot lower than it may be in some other parts of the
Well,
community.
I'll give you Malcolm X, for example. When we opened the local urban Bowtie Idea Lab, we didn't have teens at Malcolm X after school, and now we do,
Yeah,
because we've
exactly.
given them a space.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, is you have to create a space for someone as well, and make them feel welcome. And it's one of those tricky things, right? Is, do you create a space for a group that's not currently coming to the library in hopes that they do?
Right.
Or, so I think that's something we're gonna have to look at, what the population is, and then what the use is at the library, and how do we even that out to make sure we're not creating a teen space for teens who aren't going to come to the library, right?
Excellent.
how about you? Yes.
So my question is somewhat similar, this idea of space for high interest, high impact programs. And again, respecting that, we don't really try to keep too much track of who comes in to which branch. Are there patterns where people from one community will use facilities at an adjacent community, and do they cross lines? So all of your charts show everything by district. That's not necessarily how people use the system if they're interested in going to a program that's in maybe an adjacent community that's not in that district, county district. So do we know what those flows are? Like, do people in La Jolla go to the university city branches for programs? Okay.
I can tell you for that.
Bad example. I got in trouble asking somebody at North Park, don't you think of Mission Hills as your new library? And they just about
No.
So, but I am curious if for high impact things, we can't necessarily do every single thing, every branch.
And you don't
So how do you
want to.
choose? Okay.
Right, so, I thought I was skipping it. Almost there.
Yeah.
So skipping ahead a little bit. So this is one of the things that we'll look at doing as part of the master plan, is looking at actual use patterns of how people do move around this community. This is a project that we're just finishing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, where this map looks crazy. But when you start taking it apart and looking sort of at different areas, we found that there were these 6 distinct zones of use, where people who live sort of in that southeast area tended to use these 5 or 6 branches, and similar, and so that gave us the opportunity to think about, for the high impact services, we don't have to do it at all of the libraries in that zone. We can think about doing it, one here, we can make a fantastic makerspace here, we can do an extra high capacity program space here. For a community that has a small library but a bunch of families, like, we can think about making that just a family branch. It's really focused on children, and we know that we're not cutting service off to the rest of the community because they do have those patterns of use. Their geography is much different than yours here, so that's one of those areas where if we are able to do an analysis like this, we'll be able to see, like, is there a line where people just don't cross?
And it's good to see a map like this, even though there's a lot of dots on there, because we work with one library system where we found that everyone uses every library, which is a little bit more challenging, right? It's like, well, it's hard to really target specialization if there's an expectation of the same service at different size branches. Great
How do you combat the pride in each branch, right? Versus in that scenario where you're talking about possibly changing a space in an adjacent branch to another branch, but there's that pride and we talk about the inequity of the branches by comparison? How do you combat that? You know, the optics of choosing this branch to do that versus this. Do you know what I'm saying? Is it just that you use the data to back you up and you?
I think the main thing is to not assume what should be done, but it's to really say, because of these different reasons, it seems like this is where we really want to focus this level of service, or this is how we want to think of our libraries as a network of awesome libraries, some of them doing somewhat different things, because the challenge that you have is the size of some of the libraries, right? So it seems like the natural thing is to not diminish anything that makes them special and successful in that community. But to think, well, how do we actually leverage where maybe we do this program and service at this branch, and then this nearby branch is close enough, we can augment that with a different type of service, having a baseline of services that people expect, but having a different specialty, but something that's based on a shared need, and really taking advantage of having multiple smaller branches.
I think that's just something that's unique, well, not unique, but
Yeah.
I think it's something that we see a lot of here.
Excellent, okay.
In terms of the
Yeah.
feelings about the ownership of a branch
Totally.
versus those neighbors just
Yeah.
2 miles away.
Yes.
Like, we'll shop at your Trader Joe's, but we're not going to the library. I just think that's something you should consider in San Diego. I mean,
Thank you,
that's-
yeah, very, very
That's
good,
true.
that's super insightful, thank you.
You put your hand up.
Yeah, quick question. I'd love to understand from your kind of national perspective, you've obviously got an amazing number of data points, right? And maybe it's a longer answer, but what would you say are the metrics of success for a library? Because it's not just how many books are borrowed, right, or how many bodies show up, right? So what are the evolving, what are the current kind of metrics of a successful library? What are the ones you're seeing evolving? And I'd love to kind of understand where does San Diego stack up to other cities in terms of space? I think so, but it'd be great to see, right?
So your question is actually extremely good and also very difficult to answer, because great libraries are hyper-local. What I mean by that is that while on the outside, especially for public libraries, it looks like they all kind of do the same thing. They all have a collection of some sort. They've got public spaces. They've got computers. The way that they mix things together and priorities that are given for services are directly related to what that population needs. So in a small area, it's a little bit easier because it's one library, one population. When you have a library system the size of San Diego, each neighborhood could be considered that same in that same boat. And the natural state for the library in that community, whether they're part of a big system or not, is to serve and to rightfully serve that local need. And so when it comes to the technology side, that makes things really difficult because technology is good at economy of scale. That means everyone's doing the same thing and you kind of rubber stamp it. And as a technologist, I learned it 20 years ago. It doesn't work that way in libraries because rightfully we're about what those patrons want in that area. And so what works best for identifying those objectives is for the library to decide not who their peers are on paper, but who their aspirational peers are in terms of compatibility of the types of populations that they're trying to serve and the levels at which they're trying to serve those populations, and to use those as their standard. And I actually discourage the benchmarking thing because it gets frustrating for most libraries because the way every library is resourced is different as well, and that is usually a constriction on being able to exceed. So I think one area to answer, because I know that's like, hey, that sounds like theory, Carson, and it kind of is, but in a way to answer your question directly, there's a compatibility in the move across the country in this very controversial thing of doing away with fines and fees. And so this library system, like you're saying, Misty, is up there and saying we're going to provide leadership to other libraries to say that as a large system, this is something that's important to our community and to us. And we're going to show how this can be successful and the right thing to do. And so through the planning process, it's important to actually find those metrics that are useful and to the library's vision going forward in its role in the community, and then to use that as a way to measure and to make sure that we're on track. So does that address things well? Okay.
It sounds like a dodge. If I could just, I mean, I totally agree that benchmarking is, it's something you can do on a on a service by service basis, but it's really difficult.
So
to
I think, like you said, and benchmarking is not necessarily the best thing to do, but I think identifying the metrics of success is critical.
Yes, absolutely.
And you have a very different perspective
Yes.
from all the other states and cities you look after. Like, what are those metrics? Like, you're not just making this up.
Yes.
You've seen it, you know what they are, it's out there. Right? What are they? How do we use those to how we?
The library tracks a lot of things, and there's things that libraries are still working on how to track. How many people walk in the door every day, how many books are checked out, how many of those books are kids books versus adult versus teen, how many are fiction versus nonfiction, how many people attend programs, how many people, this and that. But there's a movement toward trying to focus on the outcomes and the impacts. And I think those are the things where each community is approaching that a little bit differently, because the things that your library is trying to achieve are different for every community. So, are these things measurable in the same way? Is there a way to, put a thermometer up and say, we're going to raise literacy in this community from here to here? Maybe. But that's going to be very unique and special for San Diego and San Diego Public Library.
And circulation, like per citizen or per library user, that's another metric. All of our technology metrics we need to throw out the window, because they used to be based on how many PCs the library provided per population. That's immaterial, right? It's really more about bandwidth, and it's the bandwidth keeping up with the demand that people need. So that's why, like I was saying, the benchmarks I'm not sure are useful, but definitely having target measures that are important to us are essential, crucial.
I think the question of equity is one of the questions that's really important to me. You mentioned the baseline of services. I think that's really important to determine what those are, because there are communities that are not getting the level of service that other communities are getting. So, for example, you said, well, maybe someone would go to another library, one that's not in their community, because that particular library is offering something that this library isn't. Well, but the people in that community begin to think, I believe, that, well, why can't we have better service? Why can't we, for example, this UCSD program that the library has, we were told at our small library that we couldn't have it because we were too small. So the whole question of equity is a fair question, and I wonder how it will be addressed in the context of this study. Because I could see where a lot of people, since I've been working on this, my whole idea of libraries has expanded. It's just not a library in a community, it's the impact that a library can make in the community. The impact that it can make to children and seniors and others. And so we may not be making an impact in our community because we're too small, we can't have a particular program. And I think that that's a very crucial question to address.
And I think it starts, before it starts getting complicated, because it can get complicated, it starts in a very simple manner, is what are the services, the library services that most benefit that community and are most in demand? And what is the capacity need to serve or provide those services in that area? So sometimes it's space, sometimes it's staffing, sometimes it's technology, and then asking the question, how do we make the most work within this space where it does create the equity that we need in that location for that service? That mix can be very complicated. It's very straightforward to say, what are our most compelling needs in this area, and how do we allow for those needs in this design? How do we approach our spaces and our services?
And this is why a good master planning process really needs to engage communities in that process too, because we need to make sure we're hearing from communities about the things that are really priorities for them. And a strategy of having complementary branches may not be the right strategy for San Diego, and that's something that we will test and discover through the master planning process. So, yeah.
I have a couple of questions. One, I understand where you're going with the collection density concept, that we need to free up space for, to have the program support. But we're a system where there are phenomenal waiting lists for popular books, where often, like, one copy of an older book, but an important book, may have gotten damaged or taken out, stolen, or, never returned or whatever. And and one of the pushes we're gonna have this year for our advocacy is to improve the funding for the collection, because we have a very anemic, materials budget. So where are these books gonna go? Because I don't believe that this building has the traditional stacks in the middle the way the old.
Well, hopefully they're gonna go
libraries.
home with people.
Yeah.
And I think that's the, when you talk about, and it's just like what Carson, you said about the collection, when you decrease the collection, the circulation increases, because people can see what's on. Sometimes you go in a place and it's so overwhelming because there's so much you can't even, So that is the ultimate goal, is to have a collection that is very, things don't sit on the shelf and never get checked out, right? That you want to make sure that that collection really is reflecting what your community needs, and then realizing that that may not be buying a copy of every single book that's ever been published, right? Which sometimes is that tendency, I think, is that we just purchase everything, and we're not, and we have to do a better job of really looking at the community and making sure that we're reflecting what it is that the community wants. So rather than just having, like you talk about, book warehouses where they're just sitting on the shelves and no one is using them.
And the other question is, how the previous library master plan was close to obsolete before, well, it was never fully implemented, but it was obsolete, partway into the implementation. And how long do you expect this plan to be good for? And recognizing that in the time I've lived in San Diego, I've seen huge demographic shifts in certain communities. We've had schools that have closed because there aren't kids in those communities anymore. And then we've seen new waves of families moving into other communities. And so how do you address that when you're making, because we're talking about hopefully some major building that will, some major capital projects, the capital improvement projects that will happen after this plan is implemented. So.
My journey slide possibly can help frame this. One of the things that we try to do in our master plans is be as transparent as possible about the principles that are underpinning the recommendations. And sometimes the recommendations in a master plan may not be very specific at all. For Multnomah County, Oregon, the Portland area, we didn't, because of where they were in their ability to look for solutions or develop funding for solutions, we stayed very non-specific in their recommendations. We said, here's a zone based on the mapping and how people use your library system. Over the next 20 years, we recommend that you look for opportunities to add this much space. Do not do it by adding 5,000 square foot branches. You're going to do it by adding one or two. And, go forward with that. And that gives them the opportunity to look for the right opportunities to do it. Maybe this site offers us the opportunity to add 60,000 square feet or 100,000 square feet, and we can just improve the rest. But they can make that decision as they go, because the principles are right there in the plan. We did another one for Buda River, Colorado, where we just call it a framework. We're like, here's the things that you should think about as you go look for capital improvements. Other plans are very specific. The Cincinnati one is, we know exactly what's recommended for each branch and when it's going to happen in the budget. So I think coming back around to your question, we approach every master plan like a 20-year master plan, but it's not a bad idea to revisit at points along the way. I'm working with another community right now where I'm saying, this is a 10-year plan, and you're going to update this at 5 years, because there's such a magnitude of need.
And we foresee probably, because this is not just a building plan, it also is going to incorporate technology and services and programming into this plan. So we are going to have to continually update this and stay, because, I mean, just with the technology trends change so quickly.
I think on that note, though, when we first started talking about this process, we also acknowledged that the city historically doesn't have the opportunity to update their plans as regularly as you would need to. And so what we had hoped as part of this effort that we didn't do it, or that couldn't be done the last round, was that this offered more flexibility to make determinations as you go, but not be beholden to the plan to a way that didn't give you the opportunities you needed to capitalize on over the years, right? That aren't explicitly stated in this plan, because you can't do it if it's not stated in the plan.
Yeah, and
So
it's
I
just
think
like what Jill said, you know, for this zone, it may be, you know, you have to look at this much space for this region, right? And how you get there is determined by, internally, is going to be
I think that's an
determined.
important
Yeah.
consideration for when you put together the recommendations in this plan, to offer Misty and her group the flexibility to be able to interpret that as needed at the time when it comes, and not have to go through an update to address technology.
Yeah, because so many things, I don't know that there's ever been a master plan that's been implemented exactly as documented, because so many things change. I mean, all the things that we've looked at that have changed since the last master plan
We're
was
trying to
published.
implement the one we have now.
Or preclude you from doing
All right.
that's the problem.
Technology
So-
aside and community growth aside, like, what the cost of construction is more than double what it was when that plan was put together, and that's not something we can know. And so providing a focus on what you're trying to achieve and why, and giving the flexibility to look at alternative solutions as you go.
And having a framework in order to adjust to those changes as they come up, that's something that is not always present in a lot of libraries. It's like, when things change, how do we decide which direction to go, instead of letting it be or being overwhelmed with something? What sort of criteria do we base these decisions on? How do we go back to make sure that we're staying true? I know you've had your hand up like a lot, so please, what question?
Location person, it's okay. As you look to implement the plan, whatever steps come next, I was interested in the agile and engaged staff component, how that fits into that implementation. You have an incredible building, incredible programs, and if the staff isn't up to speed and these new skill sets or whatever the community needs, I think that's a missing out. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, if you're comfortable facilitating a wild group and helping people hone down by asking two simple questions: what is working well and what can be improved? And by asking those in an open-ended way, especially in a forum, the things that are the most on people's minds are the things that are causing the pressure points. By laying these out recording them on one side and what's working well and what can be improved, you could also show the relationship between complex topics by drawing lines, because rarely is something wholly bad or wholly good. There's usually elements of both. Through that process of identifying the things that are working well and what can be improved, that's when we start identifying in that moment the gaps that are existing in terms of barriers to services, and then moving on to the vision that we would have to address that or other things as well. And so by having that lead letting, which is usually what it is, that it's really kind of a nice venting opportunity. It also shows us what the path might be for, or the opportunities for actually visionary sorts of things that we want to adjust to. And often what comes up in my experience in this is the comfort level, either a service model or a certain technology, or just the whole way maybe the library system is evolving, right? Just kind of a discomfort, mainly because people don't, especially library staff, they don't feel like they understand what's happening. They're not sure how they can get the resources that they want to do. And also reinforcing through this process that the purpose that we all exist, including Jill and I today, is that we're all working for the patrons of San Diego Library, all of us. That is at the very beginning and the ending. And so having that as our compass, we're able to see what areas of where staff can develop. And I hate the word training, because training is something that feels like it's done to you, right? It's really more about learning. How do we learn together, and how do we equip ourselves to be confident to serve people? And do we really understand what people want? How do we know what patrons want? So that can get a little more complicated to suss that out, but that's the basic model.
body or, the foundation or whatever, my experience is that how much the master plan gets revisited is how much, depends very much on how much people like what the master plan is saying, And if they don't like what the master plan is saying, it has to sit on a shelf and no one goes talks to it anymore. So, like a bad hand or something. And so I think that, putting that process in place, either through another task force or, like I said, this body or, it's obviously a wonderful tool for fundraising, as it can be, if you like what it says. But I think that that's on us, not so much on you.
That's one of the things we really, when we first embarked on this, that we said we wanted to make sure that it included technology and services and programming so it doesn't sit on a shelf. Because if it was just a building plan, we know how that, it all depends on funding.
Exactly, and engaging the community, and I'm so sorry to interrupt, but engaging the community is where the source of that comes from. And it has to come from multiple modes and different perspectives. We all know what we think we want. There's also, our job is to anticipate what's needed to fill that need, not just today, but in the future as things are going. So that's the gap that no one's quite sure. Like, I know I want a piece of pie today, but I don't want to gain 5 pounds tomorrow, right? And so making that connection where I can have my pie and stay fit means I've got to work out today. But thinking about how those things fit together with like the big aspirations and the small pieces, especially the engagement. That's why the staffing component and the technology component are important to this, because we don't want to work on anything that sits on the shelf. We really are thinking about what can we offer that really provides the transformational needs for everyone involved in this, which is our community, our staff, our partners, our funders, everybody. So that a big part of this plan is that engagement and talking to as many people as we can so we can understand and put together a common destiny. Not just because everyone has their personal interests, which is awesome. But we want to think, what is the common destiny for the system as a whole that serves today?
Well, to go on your workout, nobody likes to work out, nobody likes to really go take a look at it. Master plan is already 10 years old.
Yeah.
So, but if you want to keep that weight off, you have to go hit the gym.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and I think that putting that and showing the discipline of doing that, I think would be helpful.
Work out.
I think to continue with our exercising metaphor, if I can make this work, it's also important to be realistic about how many pounds you're really going to lose at the gym, given the amount of time you have and the amount of time you're giving yourself to do it. So we want to make sure that the plan is feasible within the resources. Like we know how projects are funded here in San Diego. We know what the resources are. It doesn't mean we don't want to give you a plan that is aspirational. It's not going to be cash necessarily, but having something, like we don't want to give you a plan that nobody likes because it's impossible. So we try to work our plans sort of front to back and back to front, like what's achievable and how do we put the best plan together that we can think of for you.
What you observed in the context of what's going on, what's the appetite for giving to support these directions? And I mean, what's the? I'm sorry, what? Why you went?
I thought I was talking with you.
I thought I was talking over someone. I didn't mean to do that. What are the trends in giving? What are donors interested in supporting? How does that play into all of this?
Excellent question. Part of me wants to bounce this over to the foundation and say, what does this community in particular respond to? Like, what will the community step up and say yes to, and what?
Well, I
what are
think
they
that
love
one of the things that we need to understand is that our philanthropic community is as diverse as the community that the library seems to represent already as they've presented to us. What I tend to hear, what we tend to hear very often are outside of capital projects, what are the needs of communities, and understanding that the needs of communities, are so very often subjective, as Claudia was saying, to either a specific community, or as they're saying, to sort of a cluster of communities, and what are sort of a broader sense of needs. So I think that there's, there isn't sort of a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. However, the development and the process of putting this plan together is certainly one that I know, both personally and hearing from our philanthropic partners, that people are excited to use as a roadmap towards philanthropic understanding when it comes to supporting the library as a whole. So I wish I could, if I knew exactly what donors were supporting, that'd be a different thing. However, what donors are and what our philanthropic community writ large is looking for is an understanding to what needs to be funded. And until we can really sort of pinpoint and zero in on what that means for not only the library as a whole, but individual communities, we won't be able to answer that question really fully for them. So we're hoping that this process serves to answer some of the questions you just brought up.
Yeah.
Do you have any of your major donors as sounding boards in this process?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. And aside from major donors, our city and citizens, I mean, everyone is going to have an opportunity to be not only a sounding board, but a contributor, an equal contributor and participant to the development of this process. Because everybody sees this process and this conversation as sort of the springboard to how we're looking at 20 years down the road. And they want to be a part of it. And that investment goes beyond major donors. It's everyone, so yeah.
And I think there's more, as far as trends, there's more public libraries that don't have such robust support from a foundation than the situation here in San Diego. So a lot are just stuck with the money that they get at the end of the chain in their local taxes, for instance. And it's a real struggle. So it's that's why I always use the hyper-local lens first. It's like, well, we really need to understand here and be inspired by trends or be inspired by other things that are happening, but really understand what our needs are here first and our opportunities, which I think are significant.
And I think that's something we're gonna have to look at as this develops later down, is what are the funding opportunities across the board, not just philanthropic, but what general fund contributions, what communities have development impact fees, what is the funding landscape for these projects as we move forward.
I wish the slides were like the cards. I can shuffle these.
Yeah.
The ones you haven't seen yet.
What have we missed? We're still working through the exact tasks that we know the general framework of the plan. We have been talking about it being about a year long, and it certainly is going to engage library staff, library partners. We're working through right now what the opportunities are for community engagement, and we want to make sure we're not duplicating what other departments are doing right now in their planning, looking for opportunities to leverage what others are doing and have one survey instead of two. So we're still working through that, but the community thread down at the bottom is a very important part of this process, and that we're still working through. These are not as interesting to me right now as they were when they put them together. We've gone through some of these, and I think one of the things that we try to do on our master planning is make it realistic and comprehensive as possible about what buildings actually cost. We've seen some communities get burned on thinking just about the cost of the building and not everything that goes into it, the technology, the furniture, the collection, the staff, whatever that needs to be the whole package. We try to put that together. We talked about needing to, it's not just nice to take technology and outreach into account when you're doing a facility master plan, but you need to, because each of those affects the amount of space that you have, the services you're providing in it, where the services are provided. So it's integral. It's sort of inside and outside through technology framework.
And as I mentioned here as well, the idea of ensuring that we're understanding how equity is essential throughout, and especially on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. It's part of that system design.
What is base target is, where it should, and what the strategies are for zone. This is, I'll go there. Anyway, but then you have some recommendations, not just for facilities, but for the framework for alternative service delivery outreach, where those sub into complement, where they may take the place of the facility instead. And if we do our job right, it sets you up for good implementation. These are some other projects we've had the fortune to work on, and they're all in some stage of implementation. We got Johnson County, Kansas, which feels very different from San Diego in some ways, but their county commissioners stepped up at the end of the plan and said, yes, we see why this is important and this benefits our community, and they unilaterally could just raise the tax levy, which is crazy to my California brain, but they can do that in Kansas. We had Jefferson County, Colorado. They actually had a little bit of money in hand. They just needed to know the priority for spending it. Which projects should we do first, and when should they go? Spokane, Washington, we did their plan a few years ago. They went out to the community in just last year, November 2018. The community said yes. One of the things they did was they happened to have their plan on the ballot at the same time as the school district. And they were very public. It wasn't a joint ballot measure. They were on the same one, but they partnered with each other to talk about and promote. And they're actually now developing 2 projects together with the school district as a way to leverage and enhance what they're delivering to the community.
You mean like the high school and the library?
They have.
Yeah. We have a high school.
Do you?
Do you have a
That's
library?
Does it work?
I was on Board of Education.
Yeah.
For
Good.
development.
Great. Yes, exactly.
Those have different, those are not cookie cutter either, right? So
No.
sometimes they work better for one partner than the other.
Great so far.
That's great.
Yeah.
So there were great questions at the break. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Maybe I missed it. So what are your next steps? What happens next? So you have this is a draft.
This is the report of the work we've done so far and the proposed next steps forward. Do you want to speak to that? Okay. Joe's going to bring up the schedule here.
This is the part we just did. This is the sort of planning context. That's what we've been, sort of where we are. From here, we start digging into each of these things more. What is the right amount of space? What does equity look like in service? Are we just looking at facilities, or are we looking more comprehensively at services that are delivered in various parts of the community? And how, we actually start doing the mapping of the data. How really are people traveling around this community and using branches together? And does that mean we can do different things in different branches? Or in this community, do we still need to make sure we're providing a core set of services everywhere? Questions? Don't know the answers. We're going to start early with our capital cost model, because we want to have that in mind. Like we said, we want to know kind of early the magnitude of what we're talking about for facilities. Does it seem crazy, or does it seem possible? Looking at some specific opportunities, looking at technology and organization, what are the implementation strategies? Does every branch need to expand? The idea of having a minimum branch size, is that still the way you want to go? Or is there a different way you want to achieve the capacity for service and where you deliver them? So we're having that plan.
So what's this timing of this phase?
This phase, we're still working it out. A lot of the variability is going to be in this community part, and how much we're doing, how much the foundation is doing through other efforts. If for Cincinnati, that plan was over a year long. They wanted to have community meetings in every single one of their 40 branches, and that takes a long time. So that's a big part of the variable that we're still working on. Yes.
So a very different question, and I don't know if this was Misty or for you guys, but I'd be interested in understanding, with books becoming electronic, the number of copies they have is kind of an irrelevant concept, right? So when I go look for Michelle Obama's audiobook, and I get a result saying, oh, it'll become available in 400 days, right? I'm just wondering, one, because publishing companies are national, what's your insights on libraries negotiating across, are libraries kind of banding together to increase their purchasing power to come up with a better rate for all the libraries to share? Or is it kind of being done a bit like every library kind of pays whatever they negotiate with the national publishing firm?
It's and you may have some insight on this too. We are starting, I think there's been some efforts recently for libraries to come together to really try to negotiate this, because we are getting a lot of push from publishing companies. If you are all, I don't know if you're familiar, but Macmillan Publishing, which is one of the big five, just recently imposed an embargo on ebooks for libraries, and that they only allow libraries now to buy one copy of an ebook for the first 8 weeks after publication, because they felt that libraries were cutting into their sales. Libraries responded, and we joined the effort in that we are no longer purchasing ebooks from Macmillan. So, and we did that because, one, Macmillan is one of the big five publishers, and it's a dangerous precedent to set. If we did nothing, all publishers, the remaining publishers may join, which creates a huge barrier to access. We also need to make sure that we're showing Macmillan and other publishers exactly how we do contribute to their bottom line. In ebooks, libraries pay, the retail price of an ebook is $15 if you purchase it on Amazon. Libraries pay $60 to $70 per copy. And we have limited use of that copy, so it's either 50 checkouts or 2 years. And we have to repurchase them. So we are we're not successfully negotiating our place with publishers. But there's been efforts by Urban Libraries Council and also the American Library Association to start to change that. And they're actually going to, they've actually taken it to DC. So they're going to be doing some work with Congress on that very thing. So.
And is that anything to do with, should that be any part of that being the strategic plan, or is that completely separate?
It's probably completely separate because it's more of a collections. But I think that it will play into how we develop collections for branches. And when we start to look at what is the size of a collection, is also looking at what the habits are for that community. Do you have more ebook, readers? You have more digital users in that community than you do people who use print, But that will really kind of influence our overall collection development strategy.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. This is not going to settle out for a while, because the impetus for this is publishers are very old school, but they're not so old school that they didn't see what happened to the process is looking at what is the opportunity to grow the library's digital service footprint to provide different things that we're not even thinking about right now because we don't have the context for it. But we can make some guesses as to what that content might be, what the library's role might be in curating it and connecting it to patrons. So I think that that battle is it got hot quick, and I can see both sides, shoring up for a long battle on this one. So we have to serve patrons in the meantime. So I think that's the strategy that we'll take in this process.
I have a couple, not so much questions, but comments about the planning and the master planning process. You mentioned that there can be all sorts of styles of master plans, some more specific, some more general. The one thing I would hope is that whatever ends up in this process is something that can be used by the library community to hold, basically, maybe not hold the politicos to the fire, something measurable in that sense. It doesn't have to be measurable in numbers, but whether they're doing it or not doing it, assuming that they buy into the whole thing. That's comment one. Comment two is a cynicism thing, when you're talking about the community involvement in the process. And I'm going to throw out numbers that have absolutely no relation to reality. But my sense is that maybe 5% of the population will simply say, well, let the library professionals decide what we want. By the way, this relates to we want to give the people what they want. Probably 50% don't care, period. Another 30% will complain when it's not what they want again. And somewhere less than 5% would actually participate in some sort of process to give input. And if that's at all realistic, I hope that's at least considered as both valuable, those people who do have something to say, and also limited.
Library staff are your secret weapon to address that gap because they're able to see and observe and to meet needs on a one-to-one basis every day. And that is actually the greatest equalizing factor because surveys give us some indication, focus groups give us some indication, different interactions. But the patterns that we're seeing, in fact, when I ask technology decisions, I always say, what are you seeing people bring in that you're not equipped to deal with? What trends are you seeing there? And sometimes they're like, oh, well, and they start listing those out. So that's the same thing in all sorts of services and things that have been tried in the past. Library staff are wonderful. They're doing this every day and seeing these trends and thinking about them.
Really want to thank you for a phenomenal presentation. I know lots and lots goes into slides getting us here today, and I know we have a lot more to go. And again, just looking at the chart, your eyes are not as good as mine, but this is phase 0, so we're not there yet. But yes, we're beginning phase 1. But thank you to everyone for attending so far, and just know that you will be a part of this. And I'm happy for the 5% or whatever the percent of people that really do care, and to our library staff with the boots on the ground, we see on a very daily basis what's not being met. And I think of Claudia, who's been at this for 20 years, so I'm going to give her more than 5% because she cares and she's still coming. So, but I think this is exciting. It'll provide the framework, the roadmap that will be much more relevant, yet still be malleable and flexible enough to meet the changing needs of the community. Who would have ever thought that, tied to these little things, you could turn on your dishwasher? Not mine, it's broken. So that being said, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining the commission. You gave really thoughtful participation.